My name is Lois Hartwell. I am 64 years old. For 2.5 years, 5 days a week, I drove 41 minutes each way across Chattanooga to pick up my grandchildren from school, feed them dinner, and stay until my daughter and her husband came home. I was not paid. We never discussed payment. That was not the agreement I later had to explain to a judge. On Thursday, March 6th, at 2:15 in the afternoon, I was sitting at my own kitchen table signing insurance forms. My son-in-law had asked me to review. He had handed me a manila envelope at Sunday dinner and said his HR department needed a couple of updated beneficiary forms. Could I just go through and sign where the tabs were? I said fine. I said I'd have them back to him by Thursday. I'm a claims adjuster by trade. Retired, but still a claims adjuster in the way you never fully stop being what you spent 32 years doing. I read every form before I sign it. That is not caution, that is habit so deep it runs before I even think. On page 4, tucked between a blank beneficiary designation and a dental coverage update, there was a printed email. 2 pages, folded once. I don't think he meant to leave it there. I don't think he's the kind of man who does things on purpose that he'd be ashamed of. He's the kind of man who does things on a timeline and forgets to clean up after himself. The email was between him and a woman named Cheryl Dunning, licensed agent with Pinnacle Residential Group. The subject line was, Birchwood, when do we move on listing? I set the pen down. My kitchen is very quiet on Thursday afternoons. There is a clock on the wall above the refrigerator that my late husband bought at a flea market in Gatlinburg in 2003, and it ticks loud enough to hear from the hallway. I heard it very clearly sitting there reading an email I was not supposed to see. My son-in-law had written, "We're hoping Q3. Depends on the assessment timeline. Doc appointment is scheduled. We just need the report in hand before we go to the attorney. Realtor said spring market is stronger anyway." Cheryl Dunning had replied, "Totally understand. These things take time. Just want to make sure we can hold the summer inventory window. Let me know when you have the paperwork and we'll get the ball rolling." Below that, my son-in-law again. "Should be 60-90 days max. The property's in good shape. She keeps it up." The property. I have lived at 3847 Birchwood Lane since 1991. I bought it with my husband the year before our daughter was born, for $78,000, on a street in East Chattanooga, where the dogwoods bloom in April and the neighbors still wave from their driveways. My husband died in 2017. I paid the mortgage off in 2019. The house is worth somewhere around $290,000 now, which I know because the assessor's office is public record, and I check every year, the way you check. I read the email 3 times. I did not call my daughter. I did not call my son-in-law. I did not even call my best friend Peg, who has been my friend since 1994, and who would have driven over in 11 minutes and said something that would have felt good in the moment and cost me later. I put the email back between the beneficiary forms. I put the cap back on the pen. I placed the entire envelope back in the manila folder. And then I sat there for a while, with the clock ticking, and let myself understand what I was looking at. The assessment. I knew what that meant because I had been in this room before. Not this exact room, but close enough. Let me back up and tell you what I did before I was anybody's grandmother. In 1985, I was 23 years old and I got hired as a file clerk at Southern States Insurance in downtown Chattanooga. The building had orange carpet and a coffee machine that scalded your fingers if you weren't careful. My supervisor was a woman named Darlene who wore her reading glasses on a chain and told me on my first day that in insurance, the document is the truth. Not what someone remembers, not what they meant. The document. I took that seriously. I worked my way up to claims adjuster in 1991. I stayed for 32 years. When I retired in 2017, the same year I buried my husband, my colleagues gave me a framed print of the Chattanooga skyline and a card signed by 43 people and a standing ovation in the conference room that embarrassed me more than I let on. 32 years of claims adjusting teaches you exactly one thing above all else. People don't lie outright nearly as often as they tell the truth selectively. You give them a form, and they fill out what helps their case and leave out what doesn't. The leaving out is where you do your work. The leaving out is the whole job. I filed that skill away in retirement the same way you file a tool you don't need every day. It doesn't go anywhere, it just waits. Now here is what 2.5 years looked like on paper, which is the only way I know how to think about it. My daughter and her husband bought a house in Hickson in 2021. Before they bought it, they lived 20 minutes from me. After they bought it, they lived 41 minutes away, if the light at Hickson Pike cooperated. My grandchildren are Junie, who just turned 9, and Beckett, who is 5, and goes by Beck. Junie started 2nd grade the fall after they moved. Beck was in a morning program at a church preschool until noon. My daughter went back to full-time work in March of 2022. I offered to help before she asked, which I want to be clear about because it matters later. I offered because I am their grandmother, and I wanted to. I drove to Hickson every Monday through Friday. I picked up Beck at noon. I picked up Junie at 3:15. I fed them both a snack, managed Beck's speech exercises the therapist had sent home in a packet, helped Junie with her reading log, and stayed until one of her parents came through the door, which was usually around 6:30, and sometimes later. 50 hours a week is what that works out to, if you count the driving. I counted once, out of curiosity, the way a former adjuster counts things. Then I stopped counting because the number made me feel like I was keeping score, and I was not keeping score. There are 2 crayon drawings on my refrigerator door right now. Junie drew them both. One is a picture of our house with smoke coming out of the chimney, which I find funny because we have no fireplace. One is a picture of me and her and Beck in what I think is supposed to be my kitchen, with a sun in the corner and 3 stick figures holding hands. She labeled them. The one in the middle says, Grandma Lois. I have not moved those drawings since she taped them up. I want you to hold that picture in your mind while I tell you the rest of this. Sometime in the fall of last year, the comments started. Not cruel ones. That would have been easier to understand. These were light, easy, said in passing. The way you say something you've been saying for a while and have stopped noticing. My daughter and I were going through Junie's school folder at the kitchen counter. I had kept it for her since Tuesday. There was a permission slip she had missed. And I mentioned that Beck's speech therapist had asked whether we could shift his Thursday session back to Wednesday because she had a scheduling conflict. My daughter glanced up from the folder and said, in a tone I could only describe as patient, I already talked to the therapist, Mom. I think you might have mixed up which day she called. I had not mixed up which day she called. I was the one who took the call. I have the note I wrote on the back of a dry cleaning receipt with the date and the therapist's name and the time she suggested. I said that calmly. My daughter said, Of course, Mom. Okay. 3 days later, Junie was telling Beck something at the dinner table. I was there. I had made spaghetti, and Beck said something wrong about what day something had happened, and Junie corrected him with the cheerful authority of a 9-year-old. No, Beck. Grandma mixes up the days. She said it the way she would say any established fact. The sky is blue. Dogs bark. Grandma mixes up the days. Beck went back to his spaghetti. Junie went back to hers. My son-in-law was looking at his phone. I kept serving garlic bread. I said nothing. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I understand how a label works. A label does not need your agreement to function. It only needs repetition. That week, I started paying a different kind of attention. At a neighborhood birthday party, a woman I had never met came up and said she had heard so much about me, that my daughter spoke about me often, and that it was wonderful how I helped out given. Here, she paused. Given everything. I asked what everything meant. She looked uncertain and said she just meant it must be hard, being on my own after losing my husband. I thanked her and let it sit there. At Christmas, my daughter's in-laws came for dinner. I overheard my son-in-law, in the hallway near the coat closet, say to his father, "She's fine, Dad. A little scattered sometimes, but she's fine." He did not know I was 2 feet around the corner pouring coffee. Scattered. I filed that word. I did not confront him. I understand that confronting someone with a soft accusation gives them the chance to revise it. I have watched claims get revised in real time my entire career. You don't hand someone a chance to get back. Then came March 6th, and the email I wasn't supposed to read. I want to tell you about what I had done 8 years before any of this started, because it's the thing that changed everything, and nobody knew about it except me and a notary public in Signal Mountain. In November of 2016, 2 months after my husband died, and 3 weeks after I filed the last of the estate paperwork with the county clerk, I made an appointment with an estate planning attorney. Her name is Rosalind Fitch, and she has an office above a dry goods store on Signal Mountain Road, and she asks questions other attorneys don't think to ask. We did the standard documents: will, healthcare directive, financial power of attorney. And then at the end, she asked me whether there was anyone I would want specifically excluded from making decisions on my behalf if I couldn't make them myself. She didn't prompt me toward an answer. She just asked and waited. I thought about my daughter for a long time before I answered. I thought about the year before, when my mother-in-law was still alive and living in her house in Cleveland, Tennessee, and my daughter had driven up 3 weekends in a row with a printed spreadsheet about assisted living costs and what the house would sell for, and went home and how much simpler things would be. My mother-in-law had told my husband she felt like she was being processed. She used that exact word, processed. She died in her own house 8 months later. My daughter cried at the funeral and meant it. That's the part that never fit neatly into any category. I told Rosalind Fitch about the spreadsheet. She didn't react. She just pulled a second document form from the drawer and said there was language for that. The document is called a Declaration of Desired Guardian and Conservator. It is 2 pages. It names my best friend Peg Albright first, and my brother Alden second, and it contains 4 sentences in the 3rd paragraph that I typed myself on Rosalind's office computer, because I did not want to say them out loud to another person. My daughter shall not serve as my guardian or as conservator of my estate. Her spouse shall not serve in either role. I write this freely, with full capacity. On this date, I ask any court considering this matter to honor my stated wishes. She notarized it on a Tuesday. 2 witnesses signed it, neither of them related to me, neither of them standing to benefit from a single thing I own. I drove home and put it in a cedar chest at the foot of my bed, under my husband's Navy discharge papers and our daughter's hospital bracelet from the day she was born, and I told myself what you tell yourself when you do something you hope never becomes necessary, that it was a precaution, that I was being careful, that families don't always end up like this. Then I left the beneficiary forms unsigned on my kitchen table. I texted my son-in-law that I needed 1 more day to look them over. He replied with a thumbs up. And then I went to work the way I know how to go to work. The first thing I needed to know was whether there was already a medical record being built around me. I had a knee replacement scheduled for late April. My right knee, which I had been putting off for 2 years, and the orthopedic group had sent me to my primary care physician in February for pre-surgical clearance. For patients over 60, that practice runs a standard cognitive screen, any procedure requiring general anesthesia. It is routine. I know it is routine because I had asked when they scheduled it, and the nurse had explained that they do it for everyone in that age group, so there is a baseline on file in case the anesthesia causes temporary confusion afterward. I had done that screening on February 11th. Clock drawing, verbal recall, orientation questions, counting backward by 7s, which I have hated since the 5th grade and which I did correctly anyway. My score was 28 out of 30. I lost 2 points on delayed word recall. They give you 5 words and come back to them 20 minutes later, and I retrieved 3 out of 5. The word I missed was velvet. That was 33 days before my son-in-law emailed a real estate agent about the assessment timeline. I am the patient. I filled out my own medical records authorization, the correct form, specific date range, specific record types, signed and delivered to the records office at my physician's practice. I have reviewed authorization forms my entire career. I know exactly how they work. 4 business days later, a large envelope arrived. Medical records are not just test results. They include everything the office generates: notes, call logs, referral requests. There was a call note in my file dated February 4th, 1 week before my cognitive screening. My daughter had called the office. She had said she had concerns about her mother's memory. She had asked to be added to the file as an emergency contact. She had asked whether her concerns could be noted in the chart. The intake coordinator had told her that nothing could be added without the patient's written authorization, and that she could not discuss the patient's records with a third party. No information was released. The call was logged anyway, with a timestamp and the coordinator's initials. February 4th, 7 days before my score of 28 out of 30. 33 days before the email to the real estate agent. She had tried to plant the seed before the tree was measured. I sat at my kitchen table with that phone note and understood something I should have understood sooner. My daughter is not a cruel woman. She has never done a cruel thing in her life that she didn't believe was the right thing. She had looked at my house and my age and my quiet daily routine, and she had decided in the same clean and efficient way she decides everything, that she knew what was best. She had found a sentence for it. I'm just worried about her, and she had started building a file around that sentence. Because a worry that is written down stops being a worry and starts being a record. I know exactly how that works. I returned the manila envelope to my son-in-law on Friday with the forms signed, the ones I was supposed to sign. I did not mention the email. Then I called Rosalind Fitch's office and took the earliest appointment she had. She is 60 years old, and her office smells like old paper, which I find reassuring. She pulled my 2016 file before I was fully seated, laid her original beside my copy, and read paragraph 3 twice with her reading glasses on. She said, "You wrote this yourself." I said I did. She said she remembered the appointment. Then she told me in plain language what the document would do in front of a judge and what it wouldn't. And I appreciated the precision. She said, "This proves you had capacity in 2016 and that you made a deliberate choice. What it doesn't prove is your capacity today. They will argue you've declined since then. That's the fight." I told her about the cognitive screen, about the phone note. She picked up her pen and wrote 3 things on her legal pad without saying anything. Then I told her the other thing. In the spring of 2022, when my daughter went back to work and I began providing daily childcare, my son-in-law had mentioned that they were enrolled in a dependent care FSA through his employer, a flexible spending account, pre-tax dollars set aside for qualifying childcare costs. He explained it briefly, said they were allowed to claim up to $5,000 per year, and that his HR system needed a provider name and taxpayer identification number on file. I gave him my Social Security number over the phone. I signed a single-page provider verification form he brought to Sunday dinner. I did not think about it again. A dependent care FSA works like this. You set aside pre-tax money. When you pay for childcare, you submit a reimbursement claim. The claim has to include the provider's name, their tax ID, the dates of service, and a certification, signed by the account holder, that the care actually occurred and that it allowed both parents to remain employed. I had never been paid a single dollar from that account. I had never been told what was submitted. I had no idea what 2.5 years of claims looked like on paper. I wrote a letter to his employer's FSA administrator. Not an angry letter. I have never written an angry letter that helped me. I wrote the kind of letter I used to receive 4 times a week, precise, formal, identifying myself as the listed care provider with the taxpayer identification number on file, requesting certified copies of all claims, reimbursements, and provider certifications submitted bearing my information for the plan years in question. Rosalind put her firm's letterhead on it and added one line noting that the records were needed in connection with a pending legal matter. It went out certified mail, return receipt requested, which is the only kind of correspondence that has ever reliably mattered in my experience. The packet arrived 12 days later. It was 64 pages. 3 plan years, claims submitted each year up to the $5,000 annual maximum. Total reimbursed to my son-in-law, $14,260. Every claim form had 2 signatures, his, at the bottom, certifying that the childcare expenses were incurred to allow him and his spouse to remain gainfully employed, and my daughter's, in the provider certification box, which she had filled out by hand each time. Provider name, Lois Hartwell. Provider relationship, grandmother. Hours of care per week, 50. Number of children in care, 2. Level of supervision, sole care provider. Signed by my daughter. The most recent form had been signed 11 weeks before she called my doctor's office to register concerns about my memory. She had certified in writing to a federal benefits administrator that I was capable of having sole, unsupervised charge of her children 50 hours a week. 11 weeks later, she tried to put a note in my medical file suggesting I was not capable of managing my own affairs. I looked at those 64 pages for a long time. I did not feel like I had won something. I felt like a woman reading her own audit. Everything was there in black and white, and none of it had ever really been about me. I have a friend named Peg Albright. She has been my friend since 1994, when we were both on a church outreach committee nobody volunteered for willingly. She is 67. She was a licensed practical nurse for 28 years and has the kind of calm that only comes from telling families difficult news for most of your working life. I called her on a Sunday evening and told her everything, in order. When I got to the part where I told her that her name had been sitting in a cedar chest under my husband's Navy papers since 2016, she went quiet for a while. Then she said, "Laura, you should have told me." I said, "I know." She said, "What do you need?" I said, "Be in the courtroom." She said she would be. My brother Alden drove down from Nashville. He is 68 and retired and has the patience of a man who spent 30 years in civil engineering, which is to say he does not get rattled by problems that can be measured. I told both of them what I had told them. I also told them what I was not going to do. I was not going to call my daughter and read her the list. I was not going to post anything online. I was not going to send the FSA documents to my son-in-law's employer on my own. I gave everything to Rosalind and let her decide what belonged in front of a judge. The petition arrived on a Tuesday morning. A young man in a jacket knocked on my door and handed an envelope through the screen. He was polite. He said my name as a question. I said yes. He handed it through and walked back down the porch steps. The document was 16 pages. It was careful and precise, and it used the word decline 17 times, which I know because I counted. It did not call me unstable. It called me a woman in decline with significant assets and no formal plan. It referenced memory lapses, navigational confusion, and what it described as a pattern of behavior suggesting diminishing capacity. Attached was an exhibit titled Wellness Observation Log. 11 entries, my daughter's handwriting, dates going back 8 months. I read it at my kitchen table with my reading glasses on. Then I got a yellow legal pad and went through it the same way I would have gone through any claim file that arrived on my desk, with a conclusion already written in the summary box. Entry by entry. The navigational confusion. There had been a Wednesday in October when I had taken the wrong exit off I-75, coming home from Junie's school, because TD Oat had changed the lane configuration during road construction, and there was no signage posted at the split. I had called my daughter to ask which alternate route she used. She had logged that call as "called me from the highway." Disoriented, unsure of surroundings. I printed the TDOT construction notice from the department's public records portal. The temporary lane change had been active for 3 weeks and had been cited in a local news segment as a source of widespread confusion for regular commuters. The repeated stories. 3 of the 4 specific instances she cited were occasions where I had said something to my grandchildren that I had also said the week before. I am 64 years old and I see Junie and Beck 5 days a week, and I tell them the same stories I have always told them because they like hearing them again. Any grandmother in this country could be logged the same way. I went through all 11 entries. Every single one had something outside my own memory to answer it. Something dated, something issued by someone with no stake in the outcome. But I needed something dated before they filed. I had it, and I had nearly forgotten about it. The month before they filed, I had asked my doctor to note in my chart that I had been experiencing mild headaches and some eye strain, which I wanted documented in case it was connected to a small medication adjustment we had recently made. My doctor had seen me in person for that visit. Her note in the chart, dated 3 weeks before the petition was filed, included the following as part of her standard clinical documentation. Patient is alert, oriented, and demonstrates clear recall of medical history and current concerns. Presents appropriate affect. Oriented, clear recall. 3 weeks before. We arrived at the Hamilton County Courthouse on a Wednesday morning in May. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches, fluorescent lights, a ceiling that hadn't been updated since sometime in the previous century. I wore charcoal gray and sensible shoes and did my own hair. Peg sat in the second row in a blazer with large buttons because I had asked her to wear something with buttons, and she had taken that seriously. Alden sat beside her. He had driven from Nashville the night before and was wearing a tie he did not own the last time I saw him at Christmas. Rosalind sat next to me at the respondents' table. Their attorney was a young man with a good speaking voice and an organized presentation. He put my son-in-law on first. My son-in-law said I was a wonderful grandmother. He said the word reluctantly twice, in the same breath pattern both times, which told me he had practiced it. He walked through the wellness log with their attorney, entry by entry. Wrong exit, repeated stories. A phone call where I had seemed unsure about what day it was. He was thorough. He had memorized the entries. Memorized is not the same as witnessed. I have spent 32 years evaluating what people say against what the record shows. I know the difference, and so does anyone who has. Rosalind stood and asked the court's permission to present 3 exhibits. The first was my cognitive screening from February 11th. She explained it in 4 sentences. My knee replacement had been on the calendar since October of the prior year. The surgical group screens every patient over 60 before anesthesia as standard protocol, not as a response to any concern. On February 11th, I scored 28 out of 30. The test existed because I scheduled surgery, not because anyone ordered it in connection with this proceeding. Their attorney objected on foundation. Rosalind pointed out that the document was a certified copy, issued by the custodian of records, with a properly executed patient authorization attached and signed by the patient herself. The judge said overruled and turned a page. The second exhibit was the phone note from February 4th. She read it aloud. My daughter had called the doctor's office. She had asked to register concerns about her mother's memory. She had asked that her concerns be entered in the chart. She had been told that nothing would be accepted from a third party without patient authorization. No information was released. The call was logged with a timestamp. 7 days before the cognitive screening. 33 days before the real estate email. Rosalind set the page down. On February 4th, she said, my client's daughter attempted to put a concern into a medical record. On February 11th, the medical record was made anyway, by a physician, and it reads 28 out of 30. The room got very quiet in a particular way. The third exhibit was the 2016 declaration. Rosalind handed the judge certified copy with the notary seal raised on the page. He read it to himself first. Then he read paragraph 3 aloud, because that is what a judge does when he wants every person in a room to hear the same words at the same time. My daughter shall not serve as my guardian or as conservator of my estate. Her spouse shall not serve in either role. I write this freely, with full capacity, On this date, I ask any court considering this matter to honor my stated wishes. Someone in the gallery made a sound. Their attorney sat very still. Rosalind was not finished. She placed the FSA documentation before the court. 64 pages, certified by the plan administrator. 3 plan years. $14,260 in reimbursements to my son-in-law for childcare expenses. Every claim form signed by my daughter in the provider certification box. Rosalind read one entry from the most recent form. Provider Lois Hartwell, sole care provider, 50 hours per week, 2 minor children. She let it sit for 3 seconds. Then she looked at my son-in-law, who was still in the witness box. The most recent claim form was signed by your wife 11 weeks before she filed this petition. On that form, she certified that was the sole care provider for your children 50 hours a week. She paused. Which document would you like the court to rely on? My son-in-law looked at the table in front of him. He opened his mouth and closed it. Then he said quietly, to no one in particular, I didn't want it to go like this. My daughter was out of her chair before he finished the sentence. She said I had been building something against them for years. She said I had hidden documents from my own family. She was still talking when the judge said her name once, in a tone that did not require volume. I did not move. I have found that when someone is doing that much talking on your behalf without realizing it, the kindest thing you can do is stay in your seat and let them finish. The judge took 11 minutes. He denied the petition. He found no clear and convincing evidence of incapacity, and he noted in the record that the most compelling evidence of my cognitive functioning had been submitted by the petitioners themselves, in triplicate, to a federal benefits administrator and bore my daughter's signature. He gave real weight to the 2016 declaration. He said, the state gives serious consideration to a person's own advance designation when made while capacity is not in question, and that the petitioners had not demonstrated good cause to override an explicit written exclusion. He taxed costs and $6,400 of my attorney's fees against them, jointly. He referred the FSA exhibit to the appropriate administrative body, which is a sentence that sounds routine and is not routine at all. The hearing was over by 10:45. My daughter found me near the elevator on the way out. She looked like she had aged since we had walked in, which I noticed because I am her mother, and I know her face better than she knows I do. She said, you had all of that the whole time. I said, I had it since 2016. She said, you never told me. I said, no. She said, why not? I thought about how to answer that honestly. I thought about the spreadsheet she had brought to my mother-in-law's kitchen table. I thought about the word processed. I thought about the crayon drawings on my refrigerator. Because telling you would have meant defending it, I said. And I didn't want to spend the years we had left defending the version of you I still believed in. She didn't answer. The elevator came. I did not take it. I walked down the stairs. Here is what happened after, because none of it was dramatic and all of it was real. The FSA administrator opened a compliance review within 30 days. My son-in-law had to repay the reimbursements and was removed from the plan. His employer put him on 60 days of administrative review. He kept his job. I was not glad about that in any complicated way. I was simply not surprised. That is the kind of man he is, not malicious, just in motion, and very good at landing on his feet. Rosalind filed a professional conduct complaint regarding several elements of the petition that she characterized as relying on selectively arranged documentation. I don't know where that landed. I don't need to know. The $6,400 came in one payment, 8 weeks later. I paid Rosalind. The remainder went into a money market account with my name on it and Peg Albright named as beneficiary. On April 23rd, I had my knee surgery. I came home the same afternoon. The anesthesia cleared by evening. I made myself tea and sat in my kitchen and looked at the crayon drawings on the refrigerator. We have Sundays now. My daughter drops Junie and Beck at 2 o'clock and picks them up at 5. She does not come inside. I am not calling that cruelty. I am calling it the shape we are in right now and leaving room for it to change. Because I have been her mother for 42 years. And I know that she is not a fixed thing any more than I am. Beck goes straight to the cabinet where I keep the animal crackers the second he arrives, every single week, as if he is checking to confirm they are still there. They are always still there. Junie found the old yellow legal pad I had used during my audit and asked me what all the writing was. I told her it was Grandma's work stuff. She nodded and went to find the markers. In June, I signed a new declaration in Rosalind's office. Same paragraph 3. Same names, one additional line, and including any person acting at their direction or on their behalf. This time, I sent a certified copy to the county probate clerk, one to my physician's records department, and one to my daughter by certified mail, return receipt requested. She signed the green card on a Thursday. It is in the cedar chest now, behind the original declaration, under my husband's discharge papers and our daughter's hospital bracelet from the day she was born. 42 years ago, in a room I sat in alone for 6 hours before anyone came to tell me she had arrived and was fine. Peg says I should have driven it over and handed it to her in person. Peg still believes in scenes. I told her the postal service does it for $1 and no one has to be forgiven afterward. The cedar chest went back to the foot of the bed. I want to say one last thing, because it's the truest thing in all of this, and I would rather say it plainly than not say it at all. I did not outsmart my daughter. I did not outmaneuver anyone. I got saved by 32 years of muscle memory that told me to read every document before I signed it. I got saved by a notary public on Signal Mountain who stamped a page I spent a decade hoping would never matter. I got saved by an intake coordinator at a medical office who did an unglamorous job correctly on a Tuesday afternoon and logged a phone call that she had no obligation to log. The paperwork you do calmly, years in advance, when no one is watching and nothing feels urgent. That is the only paperwork on earth that cannot be argued with when the time comes. Write down who speaks for you while your voice still counts, and write down who doesn't. Do it this week, while everything is still fine and no one is questioning anything, because that is the only moment when it will be worth anything. Welcome to Strong Mom Stories. If this made you think about putting your own name on a piece of paper, go do it. Leave a comment. Subscribe. I'll be here.